Alien Queen called him pet. Now she calls him husband. The war was over. Humanity's last stronghold had fallen, and the skies of Earth still carried the smoke of burning cities. The final battle had left the ground littered with shattered machines and the silence of defeat. Among the survivors, one man stood taller than most. Commander Adrian Holt, leader of the human resistance, had fought until the very end. He had not bent, he had not begged, but now he stood in chains, dragged before the throne of his conqueror. The throne room of the Seralyth Dominion was unlike anything Adrian had ever seen. Towering spires of dark crystal rose high above, shimmering with alien energy. The walls glowed faintly with shifting colors, alive with power that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat in the room. At the center, upon a raised dais of obsidian, sat Queen Seralyth, ruler of the Dominion and the woman whose armies had broken Earth. She was taller than any human, her form slender yet strong, draped in robes of deep violet trimmed with silver. Her skin was a shade between midnight blue and storm gray, smooth and unblemished. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, bright and unyielding, like stars that never dimmed. Upon her brow rested a crown of woven crystal, jagged yet elegant, humming faintly with power. The hall was filled with her court, a sea of alien nobles who looked upon Adrian with sneers of triumph and curiosity. He was the last commander of a defeated race, the final trophy of a war that had consumed countless worlds. Many expected his execution, a spectacle to mark the Dominion's absolute victory. Queen Seralyth leaned forward on her throne, her voice carrying through the chamber like a song of both ice and fire. "So this is the human commander," she said, her tone smooth but edged with mockery. "The one who promised his people freedom. The one who swore that no chains could bind him." Adrian stood tall despite the weight of the shackles that bit into his wrists. His uniform was torn, blood still staining the fabric from the battle. His eyes, though weary, burned with defiance. "You won the war," he said evenly, his voice steady despite the silence that followed. "Do what you came here to do." Murmurs rippled through the court at his boldness. No one spoke to the queen in such a way, least of all a broken prisoner. But Seralyth only smiled, the corners of her lips curving into something sharp and cruel. "Execution?" she asked softly, as if testing the word. She rose from her throne, descending the steps with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. Her robes whispered against the polished crystal floor as she circled him like a predator studying her prey. "No, Commander Holt. Death would be too merciful. Your people fought with passion, but passion cannot defeat destiny. The Dominion rules because the Dominion is strong." She stopped in front of him, her eyes meeting his without flinching. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice loud enough for all to hear, she declared, "You are no longer a soldier. You are no longer even a man. From this day forward, you are my pet." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Some nobles laughed, while others whispered in shock. Pet, a living trophy to be displayed before the court. It was not the fate of a warrior, but the humiliation of a defeated enemy. Chains were yanked, and Adrian was pulled to his knees. He did not bow willingly. His head remained high, his jaw set with unshaken resolve. Seralyth's eyes narrowed at his defiance, but she did not strike him. Instead, she placed a jeweled collar of glowing crystal around his neck, locking it with a flick of her hand. The collar hummed as it sealed, a visible mark of ownership. The hall erupted with laughter and jeers. Nobles leaned forward to get a better look, some throwing mocking words, others demanding that he be paraded through the city. Adrian ignored them all. His gaze never left Seralyth, and though he stood in chains, something about his stare unsettled her. She turned from him, raising her hand to silence the room. "Take him to the menagerie. Dress him in silks. Let every noble in this court look upon humanity's last commander and know that this is what becomes of those who defy the Dominion." The guards pulled him away, dragging him through corridors of black stone and shimmering crystal. Adrian said nothing, his silence a greater rebellion than any words. He was thrown into a chamber unlike any prison he had seen. It was not a cell of filth or darkness, but a room gilded in wealth. Pillars of crystal supported arches of silver, and in the center stood a cage of glass and steel, vast yet confining. Inside, the floor was lined with soft carpets. The walls hung with tapestries of alien artistry. A bed of silk and velvet was placed within, along with food and drink fit for royalty. Yet no matter the luxury, it was still a cage, and Adrian knew it. Days turned into weeks. Each morning, he was paraded through the court, dressed in clothes chosen to mock him. Robes of gold and crimson, jewels he never asked for. Nobles came to see him, to laugh at him, to whisper about the human who refused to bow. They expected him to break, as so many others had. But Adrian did not break. He stood tall even in humiliation, his silence sharper than any insult. When mocked, he met their eyes with steady defiance. When ordered to kneel, he refused until forced down by guards. His will was iron, his spirit unyielding. And though Queen Seralyth laughed with her court, though she mocked him with cruel words and cutting gestures, there were nights when she found herself lingering near his cage, watching, listening, wondering why this man, unlike all the others, did not shatter beneath the weight of chains. At first, Queen Seralyth visited Adrian's cage only to amuse herself. She would bring her closest advisors, letting them mock him while she tested his pride with sharp questions. "Tell me, human," she asked one evening as he stood silently within the glass walls. "Do you regret it? Fighting against the Dominion? Leading your people into ruin?" Adrian looked at her, his eyes unwavering. "I regret nothing. Freedom is worth the fight, even if the fight is lost." The words struck her more deeply than she admitted. In her empire, freedom was a word without meaning. Strength, power, order, those were the virtues the Dominion prized. Freedom was weakness. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried a certainty that made her pause. The nobles laughed, brushing aside his words as the delusions of a broken man. But Seralyth did not laugh. She studied him, and for the first time she felt something unfamiliar: curiosity. As the days passed, her visits became more frequent. At first, she told herself it was duty, that she needed to ensure her trophy remained intact, that his defiance would one day crumble for all to see. But the truth was different. She began to linger by the cage even when no one else was present. One night, when the hall was quiet and the glow of the crystal walls cast long shadows, she stood before him alone. The guards kept their distance. Adrian sat on the edge of the silken bed, his posture as upright as if he were still on the battlefield. "You are a strange man," Seralyth said softly, her voice losing its usual sharpness. "Others would beg for mercy. Others would kneel and hope for my kindness. But you do not bend." Adrian met her gaze, calm but steady. "Perhaps it is because mercy and kindness are not things you give, Queen Seralyth. Perhaps you do not know them at all." Her eyes narrowed at the insult, yet something about his words stung more than she expected. "Careful, human. Your tongue might cost you what little comfort I allow." "And yet," Adrian replied, "you are still here, speaking to me when you could be anywhere else." The silence that followed felt heavier than any chain. For the first time in many years, Seralyth had no immediate reply. She turned away, her robes whispering against the polished floor, but she did not leave. Instead, she lingered at the edge of the cage, her hand brushing against the cold steel bars. Their conversations grew longer with each passing night. They spoke of war, of victory, of loss. Adrian told her of Earth's skies before the Dominion came, of oceans that stretched beyond sight, of forests that sang with life. His words painted pictures unlike any she had known. Her empire had conquered countless worlds, but she had never heard them described with such love, such reverence. And slowly, Seralyth began to share pieces of herself. She spoke of the crown, of the weight of rule, of a life where every ally could one day turn traitor. She confessed her loneliness, though she tried to mask it as jest. She told him of the endless demands of power, of a people who bowed in fear but never in love. It was in those moments that she stopped seeing him as a pet. His words chipped away at the walls she had built around her heart. His defiance no longer felt like an insult. It felt like a mirror, showing her the parts of herself she had long buried. But not everyone in the Dominion was blind to the change. Lord Tharvan, her most ambitious advisor, watched with sharp eyes. Tall and broad, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes of molten amber, he had long hungered for more power. He saw the way the queen lingered near the human, the way her voice softened when she spoke to him. To Tharvan, this was weakness, dangerous weakness. One evening, during a council meeting, he spoke boldly before the throne. "My queen," he said, his voice heavy with false respect. "The court whispers of your fascination with the human. They see the way you protect him, the way you refuse to give the order for his execution. This is not the strength of a ruler. This is the weakness of a woman." Gasps filled the chamber. To accuse the queen so openly was a risk few would take. But Tharvan was confident, and his eyes glittered with ambition. Seralyth's gaze was cold as she looked down from her throne. "Careful, Tharvan. Your tongue dances close to treason." "Forgive me, Majesty," he said smoothly, bowing low though his words carried no humility. "But the Dominion must see its ruler as unyielding. The human is a symbol of rebellion, a spark waiting to ignite. If you keep him alive, you endanger us all. I urge you to end this now." The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed upon the queen. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her hand rested on the arm of her throne, fingers tapping slowly against the crystal. Finally, she spoke. "The human lives. His fate is mine to decide and mine alone. This discussion is ended." The nobles shifted uneasily, but none dared challenge her further. Tharvan bowed again, but his eyes burned with hatred. That night, as Seralyth returned to the quiet of her chambers, she found herself unsettled. Adrian's presence had begun to change her, and the court could see it. She told herself that it was nothing, that she was still the unbroken queen of the Dominion. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw his face. When she stood on her balcony, she remembered his words about freedom and love, words her empire dismissed as foolish. And she realized with a jolt of fear that the whispers of her court were true. She was beginning to care. Whispers spread like wildfire through the palace. Nobles spoke in hushed voices, servants repeated what they heard, and before long, every hall of the Dominion citadel carried the same rumor. The queen was infatuated with the human. Adrian heard the whispers too. Guards muttered when they thought he could not hear, and the nobles who came to mock him now carried an edge of fear in their voices. The laughter had not vanished, but beneath it lay suspicion, and suspicion was more dangerous than cruelty. Seralyth felt the weight of it in every council meeting. Her advisors looked at her differently now, some with doubt, some with contempt, and some with open hostility. Lord Tharvan led them all, his voice sharp, his tone dripping with false loyalty. "The court grows restless," Tharvan warned one evening as the council gathered in the throne room. "They question your strength, Majesty. They question your judgment. This human does not belong in silks or cages. He belongs in the dirt, broken and forgotten. As long as he lives, you invite rebellion." Others murmured in agreement. Councillor Valora, a tall and thin noblewoman with pale green skin and eyes like shards of ice, nodded sharply. "The people are watching. They saw our armies burn earth to ash. They saw humanity fall. To keep their commander alive is to invite doubt. What message does it send if the queen of the Dominion spares the enemy's leader?" Seralyth sat upon her throne, her face carved in stone, but her thoughts churned like storm clouds. Her eyes flicked to Adrian, who stood in chains at the edge of the chamber, brought there as he always was when her council gathered. His head was held high, his gaze fixed forward, unbroken. The court wanted his blood. Tharvan demanded it. Valora urged it. The weight of tradition pressed down upon her shoulders, and she felt the crown heavier than ever. Yet when she looked at Adrian, she saw not a prisoner, not a trophy, but a man who refused to bow even in the shadow of death. "The human lives," she said at last, her voice ringing across the chamber. That is my decision, and my decision is law. The council bowed their heads, but not one of them truly bent. Seralyth could feel their anger simmering beneath the surface. Later that night, she walked the empty corridors of her palace, her steps echoing softly against the crystal floors. She told herself she was restless, that sleep would not come, but her feet carried her to the same place they always did, the gilded cage. Adrian stood inside, awake, his hands resting against the cold steel bars. When she entered, he straightened, his eyes meeting hers with the same fire that had never dimmed. "They want me dead," he said quietly. "They do?" she admitted, her voice low, her mask of cold authority slipping in the shadows. "And they will not stop pressing me until I give them what they want." Adrian tilted his head, studying her. "Then why do you not?" For the first time, Seralyth hesitated. She had asked herself that question countless times, but she had never spoken the answer aloud. She moved closer, her hand brushing against the bars. "Because," she said slowly, her voice almost a whisper, "when I look at you, I see something I have not seen in a very long time." Adrian's brow furrowed. "And what is that?" "Truth," she said. Her eyes lingered on him, and in that moment, she was not a queen, not a conqueror, but a woman standing before a man who had never lied to her, never pretended, never bowed. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. Yet, while Seralyth lingered in her quiet vulnerability, Tharvan was already moving his pieces. He met with nobles in shadowed chambers, whispering of the queen's weakness. He painted her care for the human as betrayal, warning that the dominion would crumble if she was not stopped. Valora joined him, her ambition as sharp as her tongue. "The court will not follow a queen who forgets her duty," she said. "The people will rise if they believe she favors an enemy over her own kind." Tharvan's eyes gleamed with hunger. "Then we give them reason to rise. The queen has chosen the human over the dominion. If she will not act, then we must." Plans of rebellion began to take shape in the dark. Soldiers were bribed, messages sent to loyal allies across the stars. The first sparks of a coup were lit, hidden from Seralyth's gaze. Adrian sensed it before she did. He saw the way the guards looked at him now, not with mockery, but with hatred sharpened by fear. He noticed the way nobles avoided speaking when the queen was near, their whispers silenced only by her presence. The air of the palace had changed. It was no longer triumph. It was tension waiting to break. One evening, as Seralyth stood outside his cage, Adrian spoke quietly. "They will come for you." Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Your own people. They fear you because of me. They see you as weak. They will not rest until they take what you have." For a moment, Seralyth said nothing. Then, with a small, humorless smile, she replied, "Let them try." Her words carried confidence, but deep inside, she knew the storm was already gathering. The storm broke without warning. It was deep in the night when the first cries rang through the palace. Alarms blared, the sound of steel against steel echoed through the halls, and the air filled with the clash of soldiers fighting their own kin. Tharvan had made his move. His loyalists, armed and ready, poured into the citadel like a tide of fire. Adrian woke to the sound of shattering crystal. His cage trembled as explosions shook the walls, and distant shouts carried through the corridors. Guards ran past, some to defend, others to join the uprising. For the first time since his capture, the palace felt less like a prison and more like a battlefield. The door to his chamber burst open, and two figures entered. They were Dominion soldiers, their armor marked with the sigil of Tharvan. One sneered at Adrian, raising a blade that gleamed in the dim light. "The queen is finished," the soldier growled. "You are free, human. Leave now and you may live. Stay, and you will die with her." For a moment, the offer hung in the air like a knife between choices. Freedom, escape. He could walk away, vanish into the stars, and never again see the woman who had humiliated him, mocked him, chained him. But Adrian did not hesitate. His answer was clear the moment the words left the soldier's lips. No. The soldiers blinked, caught off guard. Adrian's eyes burned with a fire fiercer than ever. If she falls, then I fall with her. Unlock this cage, or kill me here. The hesitation cost them. With a sudden roar, loyalist guards stormed the chamber, blades flashing. The rebels were cut down where they stood, their bodies collapsing before the cage. A loyalist captain, his armor dented and streaked with blood, rushed forward and unlocked the crystal bars. "Commander Holt," the captain said breathlessly, handing Adrian a blade. "The Queen needs you." For the first time since his capture, Adrian's hands closed around the hilt of a weapon. It felt natural, as though no time had passed since the battlefield. He gripped the sword tightly, his eyes sharp, his stance ready. He raced through the burning corridors, the captain at his side. Smoke curled through the halls, and the air stank of ash and blood. Nobles fled in panic, their silken robes stained with soot, while soldiers clashed in every chamber. The citadel, once a symbol of unshakable power, was crumbling from within. He found Seralyth in the throne room. The great hall was a storm of chaos. Crystal pillars cracked under the weight of explosions, shards scattering like glass rain. Loyalists fought desperately against rebels, the floor slick with spilled blood. At the center, Queen Seralyth stood tall, her violet robes torn, her crown tilted, her blade glowing with alien energy. Lord Tharvan faced her across the dais, his molten eyes blazing with fury. His armor was dark and jagged, forged for war, and in his hand he wielded a massive war axe that crackled with power. "This ends tonight," Tharvan shouted, his voice carrying above the chaos. "The Dominion belongs to strength, and you have forgotten what that means. You let weakness into your heart. You let this human poison your rule. I will cleanse the throne, and I will claim it." Seralyth's eyes burned with defiance. "You will claim nothing but death, Tharvan. You speak of strength, yet you rise against your queen with betrayal. That is not strength. That is cowardice." Their blades met in a clash that shook the hall. Sparks flew as sword and axe collided, each strike a thunderclap. Seralyth moved with deadly grace, her strikes precise and swift, but Tharvan's power was overwhelming, each swing of his weapon threatening to break her guard. Adrian did not wait. He charged into the fray, cutting down rebels that swarmed toward the throne. The loyalists rallied at his side, inspired by the sight of the human commander fighting once more. His blade carved through the chaos, his movements fueled not by duty to his people, but by the bond that had grown in chains and shadows. He reached the dais just as Tharvan's axe sent Seralyth staggering. Without thought, Adrian stepped between them, raising his sword to meet the crushing blow. Steel rang, and the force of the impact rattled his bones, but he did not fall. Tharvan snarled, his amber eyes blazing. "You dare stand before me, human? You are nothing but her pet." Adrian's voice was steady, unshaken. "I am no one's pet, and I will not let you take her." The battle raged. Seralyth regained her footing, her blade joining Adrian's as they fought side by side. Each strike, each parry, was a rhythm of survival and defiance. For the first time, they were not queen and captive, not conqueror and conquered, but warriors fighting as equals. The court watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded. The human they had mocked, the man they had jeered at, now stood shoulder to shoulder with their queen, cutting through betrayal with fire in his eyes. Together, they pressed Tharvan back. Seralyth's sword slashed across his armor, while Adrian's blade struck true against his side. The rebel lord roared in pain, his strikes growing wild, his fury blinding him. And in that chaos, Seralyth saw her opening. With a cry that echoed through the throne room, she drove her blade through his chest. The glow of his molten eyes dimmed as the axe slipped from his hand. He fell to his knees, choking on his last breath, before collapsing in silence. The hall froze. The sound of battle faded as the rebels, seeing their leader fall, broke in fear. Loyalist soldiers surged forward, cutting down the last of the resistance. The rebellion crumbled as quickly as it had risen, leaving only the smoke of defeat hanging in the air. Seralyth stood above Tharvan's body, her chest heaving, her blade dripping with blood. Adrian lowered his sword, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion, but his eyes never left her. They had survived. Together. For a long moment, the throne room was silent. Then, slowly, the remaining nobles gathered, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. They bowed before the queen, but she knew their eyes carried questions, doubts, whispers that would never end. She looked at Adrian, at the man who had once been her trophy, her pet, and now her savior. And in that moment, she knew what choice she would make. The throne room was quiet now, the chaos swept away by the weight of victory. Smoke still curled through the air, and broken crystal littered the floor like frozen tears, but the sound of rebellion had been silenced. All eyes turned to Queen Seralyth. She stood tall, though her robes were torn and blood streaked her skin. Her crown, cracked in the battle, still clung stubbornly to her brow. She looked less like a monarch draped in silk and more like a warrior forged in fire. And beside her stood Adrian Holt, the human who had come to this palace in chains, who had endured humiliation, who had been mocked as weak, and who now held his sword steady, his eyes sharp, his presence undeniable. Whispers rippled through the nobles, sharp as knives. He fights with her. He protects her. He defies even death for her. Seralyth's voice cut through the murmurs, strong and unyielding. Tonight the Dominion was tested. Not by the strength of our fleets, not by the reach of our empire, but by the poison of betrayal. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the gathered court. Lord Tharvan sought to break us, to claim the throne with treachery. And yet he has fallen. Her blade, still stained with Tharvan's blood, pointed toward the body at her feet. Let all who would betray me see his fate. The nobles bowed their heads, some in fear, others in reluctant respect. But Seralyth was not finished. She turned, her eyes settling on Adrian. For a long moment, silence filled the hall. It was as though the universe itself held its breath. This man, she said, her voice softer now, though no less commanding, was brought here as a prisoner. He was mocked, caged, and treated as nothing. Yet when betrayal rose against us, he chose not freedom but loyalty. He chose to stand by my side. Her words struck like thunder. Nobles lifted their eyes, staring at the human who dared stand beside their queen as though he belonged there. Strength, Seralyth continued, her gaze never leaving Adrian, is not measured by bloodlines. It is not measured by titles or by the cruelty of conquest. Strength is measured by the heart. And in his heart, I have seen a power greater than any Dominion fleet. Adrian's chest tightened. For all the battles he had fought, all the moments of pain and fire, nothing struck him so deeply as her words. Seralyth took a step closer, her hand brushing his as she spoke the words that would change everything. Before this court, before the Dominion, I claim him not as a prisoner, but as my equal, as my chosen, as my husband. The hall erupted in shock. Gasps filled the air, some noble women covering their mouths, some lords stepping back in outrage. A human, her husband? It was unthinkable, a scandal beyond measure. But Seralyth did not waver. Her violet eyes blazed as she raised her chin. Let any who doubt me speak now. Let any who believe me unfit step forward. Silence. Not one noble dared move. They had seen her strike down Tharvan with her own blade. They had watched Adrian fight beside her, unyielding. To defy her now was to invite death. One by one, the nobles bent their knees, bowing before the queen, and the man who now stood at her side. Seralyth's hand slipped fully into Adrian's, their fingers entwining with quiet certainty. The gesture was simple, but it was more powerful than any crown, any throne, any proclamation. Adrian looked at her, his voice low but steady. Are you sure about this? Your court will never forgive it. They will whisper. They will scheme. Let them whisper, Seralyth interrupted, her lips curving into a rare smile. Let them scheme. I have faced greater storms than gossip, and I will face them all with you. For the first time since his capture, Adrian allowed himself to breathe freely. The weight of chains, of humiliation, of doubt, fell away. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer a weapon. He was her partner, her equal. The war had forged something neither of them had expected. Not obedience, not submission, but a bond. A bond stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal. As the nobles bowed and the fires of rebellion burned themselves into ash, Seralyth lifted her hand with Adrian's still clasped in hers and declared, her voice echoing through the shattered hall, "The Queen does not bow, but tonight, the Queen stands with her chosen." And so began a new chapter in the history of the Dominion, one not written in conquest, but in defiance, in loyalty, and in love. The prisoner who had once been paraded in chains had stolen not just the heart of a queen, but the heart of an empire.